Welcome to another episode of the Ranting Cast. I'm Frank Curry, and this week I am joined by Anthony Sciandra of xBuffalo. Anthony, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Frank. Thanks for having me on, bud.
Yeah, no problem. So obviously this is the second podcast we're doing this week. Then Anthony, we've had to push, time because you've got a bunch of stuff going on. You just had another battle with COVID, so it's obviously good to see you're doing well again.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So we're obviously going to be talking Sabres, talking about, we're not going to really go over last night's game. Let's forget about it. Let's just push it out. You like a lot of the stuff we saw, but they didn't get the results. That's all we can say.
Mm-hmm.
Really. I want to talk with you about a couple things. One, the case of Casey Middlestat. Why is he still in the top 9? 2, the goaltending. How do we really feel about the goaltending this year, i.e. Eric Comrie?
Mm-hmm.
And 3, all the injuries they've had on defense, and how can they supplement it until guys like Yoki Haru, who should be coming back soon, Matthias Samuelsson, who will probably get back at the end of the month, and then maybe at least help give Lyubushkin more time to really heal up his injury, because I think Chad on your guys' podcast that you put out yesterday or the other day, he mentioned like he's Lyubushkin's basically playing on one foot.
Yeah.
So we'll go over that. So let's start with the elephant in the room, Casey Middlestat. What's there to really see in him anymore, I guess, would be my thing. I'm gonna look at some of his underlying numbers, but I talked about it earlier this week. I mean, right now he's 5th worst on the team in expected goals for percentage at 5-on-5 at 44%. Goals for per 60 is at 1.59, and goals against is at 2.41. And most of his points this year has been on the power play or shorthanded. And he's only got 2 points at 5-on-5 right now. So why? I guess the biggest question that we're all trying to figure out is, why is he still in the top 9?
That's a great question, Frank. I wish I had a good answer. So
Yeah.
the popular opinion on that kind of seems to be that, well, they're trying to boost trade value. The problem I have with that logic, I guess, is we've been saying that since maybe March 2020. Yeah, I mean, that they've been, it's all been about trade value with him. But it's like, okay, at what point though are we going to abandon that experiment? Because I'm pretty sure other GMs around the league realize what he is, right? The switching him from center to wing to center, the flip-flopping, putting him on the first line, and then having Jack Quinn sit instead of him really doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because Jack Quinn has been, in terms of underlines, and he's been scoring a lot. I think he's on like a 3-game point streak too, but his underlines are very good. As of 2 games ago, he was the team XG leader. I don't know if that's the case anymore.
As of right now, it's Cale Clegg at 62%.
Okay. And so
which is interesting.
Where's Quinn at? He's got to be like
Quinn is 4th right now.
4th, okay. So he dropped a little bit. He's probably high 50s, I would guess.
56%.
56, yeah. Okay. So I mean, he's playing really well on the year, and he's putting, he's finally getting points. So it's kind of odd to me that he's the choice. But again, I guess the only reason it wouldn't be Middlestat is they really like him for some reason, and they're just seeing something internally that virtually nobody else is seeing, or they have some kind of trade aspirations for him at some point, right? I think it's probably the latter. I think they just feel better about him than we do. He's interesting, right? So I don't want to completely discount him as like a totally useless entity. He's a good power play player. He is. He's got good results on the power play historically. I think when they allow him to force the issue on the penalty kill, meaning like actually play a power kill and put pressure on the defenseman at the point, he does very well. He can kind of initiate that odd man rush. It's a good role for him. So he's a good special teamer. There's no taking that away from him. And they're good but not great. But his transition numbers are good, right? He's good in the neutral zone. For as kind of lackadaisical as he can seem sometimes, he does have that second burst of speed that he again kind of uses infrequently, which is why he doesn't get credit for it, and maybe
Mhm.
rightfully so, right? Um, so I don't think he's completely useless. I just think at 5-on-5, at some point, I need a 23 or 24-year-old center, whatever he is, to have developed any semblance of a defensive game, and he hasn't, right? Basically, I mean, if you look at it historically, this season included, but primarily the 2 seasons prior, Casey Middlestad's numbers with and without Rasmus Asplund on his line are incredibly night and day. I mean,
Mhm.
I think it's something, and I'm not even exaggerating, it's something close to a 20% XG delta. Like, it just falls off a cliff because if you look at the film of their shifts, right, Asplund was assuming some of those center responsibilities, despite the fact that Middlestat was taking the face off, right? And you saw it a little bit actually when Jack Quinn was on Middlestat's line for a few games there too, where Quinn had a much wider range of location on their shifts, meaning he was covering more areas of the ice, and you would see, particularly on offense, Middlestat was kind of hanging on that right side almost exclusively. So if he's not playing with a winger who is capable of some of that two-way centerman responsibility, he falls apart. And that's why you see the bad metrics. That's why you see him out there getting hemmed in his own zone. And so he's a complementary player at this point. And they're playing him, or treating him, I should say, like he's a line driver, and that's simply not the case. So I guess that's my thoughts on him.
I mean, it's just to me, it's just like, all right, at some point you've got to just start playing the guys who are playing well up
Mm-hmm.
higher in the lineup. And if you're looking at Kate at Middleset and thinking, yeah, I mean, look, he's getting points on the power play. It's like, okay, fine, but what's he doing 5-on-5? Where that's where most of the game is being played at. And
Right.
if you think you're seeing results out of him, I gotta bring you down to earth a little bit. I mean,
Yeah. The
you
only thing,
guys
the
thought,
only other thing I'll mention real quick. Sorry, I don't want to
no,
cut you
yeah,
off, but it's not very important to me. But there are definitely coaches who value this. Right now, Casey Middlestat's really the only center who's winning faceoffs, which again, not
yeah.
a particularly dire metric in my opinion, but there are NHL coaches who feel that's important. And I can't say whether or not Don Granato is one of them, but he may be reluctant to scratch his only guy, his only center who's winning faceoffs. So
Yeah,
that's another point to consider, I guess.
I've had conversations with people too about the importance of face-offs as well. I
Mhm.
think they have some importance, but I think they only really come into play in certain aspects of the game,
Mhm.
But when you look at it overall as a whole, I'm just like, it doesn't
I-
really matter that much because like I look at it as if you're a good puck retrieval team, you don't need
Mhm.
to be good at faceoffs because if you could get to the puck first after the faceoff, who cares what happens in that faceoff? I mean, you look at Colorado, who was a bottom five faceoff team last season. They won the cup
Mhm.
because they're
Mhm.
really good at puck retrieval. You get when you have guys like Arturi Lehkonen and Valerie Nichushkin, and then Nathan McKinnon as well, who can just go and get the puck after a draw
Mhm.
right away. So,
Well, here's something
I
I
mean,
want people to think about, right? So a center who plays second to third line duty, right, will probably average between 800 and 850 faceoffs a year, right?
mhm,
That equates to roughly 10 per game, okay? So if you're winning 5 of those 10, right, you're at obviously 50%.
yep,
If you're winning 4 of those 10, that's a 10% delta, right? But it really only would result in one additional face-off lost per game. So think
yep,
about that for a minute, right? A 10% delta, which makes you think like this guy's horrible at face-offs and this guy's great at them. That guy is really only winning one more per game. So like the
yep,
margin there, the effect on the percentage is so narrow, which is why I don't feel they're super important. I don't think that if you gave me two comparable players, right, and one had better expected goals metrics at 5-on-5, but one of them won me one more face-off per game than the other guy,
mhm.
I'm making it rain on option A, man. And that's just kind of always been my logic on their importance.
Yeah, I'm with you too on that. I guess the question now becomes what does end up being of Middlestat? Does he even stay beyond this year? Do they eventually maybe put him on the fourth line? I mean, at this point, I'm almost thinking if they're trying to showcase him for eventual trade, the more you play him up in the lineup, I think the less you're gonna get, because their GMs are gonna realize, especially teams who are heavy in analytics, are gonna see, yeah, he's no good at 5-on-5. I mean, we can use him on the power play, but we're going to have to shelter his 5-on-5 minutes. So I don't want to be giving up a third round pick or a second round pick for a guy who I'm only going to be playing maybe, a few minutes a night at 5-on-5 and really only giving him power play time. I don't think teams are going to really see the value in Middleset the more they play him here.
Well, you said it right. I mean, one of the things you mentioned, playing him up in the lineup where there are analytics savvy teams and there are teams that barely have anything resembling an analytics department, right? So, end of the day, if you look at him right now, he's on a 50-point trajectory, right? Mm-hmm. So, playing up in the lineup, he is getting what I call vanity points, right? Which he's got a lot of assists on the power play, not much going at even strength, but that his point production is could be valuable, right? So if that's their logic, right? If they've been, and we don't know the conversations they've been having, right, to this point, and so if they're talking to a GM who is big on just raw box score production, right, he wants to see those type of results, like, well, maybe then it is a smart tactical move, but I think it's costing them wins and losses now, and that's something the fan base is probably not okay with. I think while more tempered fans weren't really expecting playoffs this year, they were expecting improvement, right? Which I think is
progress. Yeah,
it's taking place. But I think losing 3 in a row, you're starting to feel a little bit of like that. Those old bad vibes sneak in here, at least among fans. I'm not speaking for the team, obviously. So I don't know how long you're going to be able to get away with him kind of floundering around, but collecting vanity points. Like, okay, my hope here is that it's trade leverage and it turns into something great. But my gut feeling is that they just kind of like him. And I don't think the analytics department probably likes him, but I think the coach does. And Don Granato has weird favorites, man. So he has a favorite on offense and defense, right? Where Henry Yokiharu's numbers are bad when you put him in a top 4 role, right? And they get a little better when his workload is reduced. But I mean, last year he was the team's second leading ice time defender, right? And this year, while he was healthy, he was getting a lot of minutes again. It's like he really likes Yokiharu and Middlestat, which, like, if your coach is going to have a blind spot, like, there are worse players to have a blind spot for, right? But on the same token, it's concerning because I think it's clouding his judgment with how he kind of optimizes his lineup. I'm not going to speak for the defense right now because he's working with the 0506 Doug Janik, Jeff Shilson group, essentially. But offensively, I think his judgment's a little clouded there, and I've yet to see him really put together an optimized set of forwards, which I think he's got the talent now to do. So I'll be interested, like you, I'll be interested to see what they kind of continue to do with Middlestat, specifically if his underlyings keep being bad, because an analytics department that size and, with that much kind of money invested in it, eventually their voice is going to be heard on that front.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I'm gonna just really quick. I'm gonna go to Cap Friendly. I'm gonna look at Middleset's contract. Obviously, he signed this year and next year. Yeah, and he's got RFA still.
Got a really reasonable AAV though, right?
Yeah, it's 2.5, and this is a contract that was signed last September, actually. So I'm kind of trying to piece together when the analytics department really started to come together and wonder if this is,
So it was right around that time. So I think the only person rather who was hired, like actually a part of the Sabres at that time, was Karmanos. I don't think what's his, oh my God.
Sam Ventura.
Thank you. Sam Ventura, Dom Gallimini, those types of people. I don't think they were. Matthew Barlow, who's fantastic. I don't think they were in the fold yet. I'm actually positive they weren't. So, but Karmanos was there. He's probably just starting to get the bones of that department built. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that. And that just to me kind of makes me wonder if, well, since the analytics department wasn't here
Hmm.
when Middlestat signed his contract, they're not going to have much of a voice when it comes to him because of that, because it was all
Maybe.
the before and whatever. And
Hmm.
you hear that kind of stuff all the time. Um, Let's move on really quick from Middlestat. Let's you mentioned it earlier. Let's talk about the defense. Yoki
Hmm.
Haru is one of the big talking points I wanted to talk about before he got injured, actually, before basically broke his face.
Mm.
Um, he's himself has just been a weird anomaly as well. I mean, he showed some promise. I mean, for goodness sake, when he got here to Buffalo, he made Marco Scandella look competent, which we didn't think would ever happen. And
Hmm.
then Scandella gets traded, and then all of a sudden, and then really Yoki Haru's just been on a downward turn like ever since. I mean, it's almost becoming a lot of people like to say it's almost becoming Ristolainen like, really, and maybe not as much as bad as what Ristolainen was, but at the same time, I mean, is he a top four defenseman? Do we think he still can be? I guess that's the thing is I want to know. And you put out an article recently about some defenseman options that the team could pursue. So
Hmm.
I want to go over that as well.
All right, yeah, I'll start with Yokiharu. I think comparing him to Risto is probably a bridge too far for me.
Mhm.
Ristolainen was one of the top three time on ice leaders in the league, and also one of the probably bottom three, expected goals defensemen in the league. So
Mhm.
that will always be. I don't know that an NHL team will ever do something that detrimental to their own success ever again. Like it was a really something, and for that long. So I think I'd stop well short of that comparison, though. Like you, I have seen people kind of hinting at that, but I think it's a totally different situation.
Yeah, I don't think it's exact as well. I think it's
Right.
just maybe you're looking at it like on a parallel level.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's a subject of a guy getting a lot of ice time who isn't playing very well, right? And
Mhm.
yeah, one of the things I think that's gonna hurt him more here, and I think is gonna have more people kind of turn on him. He got a lot of time with Owen Power to start the season, and they failed pretty miserably together. And
Mhm.
Kale Clague, aside, but alongside Owen Power, they've been very solid, right? They've had mishaps, right? Clay historically doesn't have good underlyings, and Power's very young, right? So they've had their moments of poor play, but overall, for putting your rookie, second pairing to left-hander with a, guy who I don't know what has he played X amount of NHL games. You know what I mean? Over the past few years, just someone who's
Mhm.
probably your ninth defenseman. Um, that typically wouldn't work out very well, but the Sabres have managed to get good results from that duo. And I think that bodes poorly for Yoki Haru, that this guy who's a relative, just pretty much an irrelevant player, a second pairing AHL guy is somehow producing results with this, on any other team, franchise cornerstone defenseman, right? Where you got Dalit on,
Yep.
kind of who's always going to be ahead of him. But um, yeah, I think it's bad for him. And I think what's even worse is if you bump him down to the third pairing, I think stylistically he's a horrible fit for Jacob Bryson.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know that there is a really good path for Henry Yokiharu to get sheltered. I mean, we saw for, oh my god, the better part of 2 seasons that him and Darlene are not a good combo together, right? So it's
Yep.
not like you could try and shelter him that way. So I'll be curious to see what they do when he comes back. They've already broken up Clegg and Power, if you're basing it on practice lines, because Power was skating with I forget who today, but Pilot was with Fitzgerald, I think, on that third pairing, or Clegg rather. Pilot and Clegg were your third pair, and I forget who Power was skating with, but it doesn't matter.
Power was with Pilot
Oh, he was with Pilot. Who was Clegg with?
Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald. Okay, so I
Yeah.
flip flopped them. Okay, um, but yeah, so he's already separated them, which almost feels like a prelude for you're going to see Power Yokiharu again when
Yeah.
Yokiharu's back, which is super disappointing to me because I don't think that tandem has worked well. Um, So we'll see, but I'm not very optimistic on Jokiharju's trajectory. I mean, when his first season in Buffalo was very solid. I had him behind Dahlin. I probably had him as the team's second best defenseman that year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which low bar because the defense was largely terrible. But and you had Jake McCabe out for the season, right? But still, in all, I mean, he showed a lot of promise. And then last year, I've said it on multiple podcasts, and I've probably written it in one of my articles at some point. I feel that of all the young guys last year who were kind of getting their, establishing themselves in the future core, he was the only one who really disappointed me, like on a deep level, right? Like Middlestad's kind of in that conversation, but like I was expecting growth and we got regression, which is really disappointing. And then how he started this year again. I know he hasn't had as many games because he got hurt so early, but bad start. And small sample, but looking at it compared to last year, you're kind of seeing a guy who maybe his development just got permanently stalled by Ralph Kruger's weird system because like his downfall kind of coincides with Kruger's arrival, right? And his implementation of one of the worst defensive systems I've ever seen in the NHL. So I don't know what the answer is for the guy, but yeah, I'm not optimistic.
Yeah, me neither. I'm feeling both Middlestad and Jokiharju could in the summer maybe if maybe the Adams and the Analytics really gets their way, could be moved on for picks, just to take them for picks, or you package them in a trade for probably another defenseman at that point, which after this coming break, we'll talk about the potential defenseman that they can acquire, where maybe if they have another injury at defense and Lyubushkin maybe has to go in IR, or who knows what happens. We could talk about that article you posted and talk about some guys who can maybe come in and at least temporarily just ease the pain right now and at least bandage the hole that's being held on this defense. So we'll take a real quick break and be right back. Tonight's show is brought to you by John and Mary's, a Buffalo tradition for pizza, subs, and wings since 1952. From hoagies, subs, and wraps to traditional pizza and wings, John and Mary's menu is packed with old-time flavors and a few modern twists on classic recipes. You could cool down with Perry's ice cream or warm up with a cup of homemade soup. If you're not in the mood for pizza or wings, we have plenty of other options: seafood platters, burritos, fresh salads, and more. There is something fresh and delicious for everyone at your table. Catering, online ordering, and delivery options available. Located in the heart of Buffalo's Theater District, the Buffalo Dinosaur Barbecue occupies a former vault that stored movies for Universal International Pictures. Dinosaur Barbecue has been in Buffalo since 2014 and is located on 301 Franklin Street. Looking for a food stop after your day trip to Niagara Falls? Only 30 minutes away. Back at it on the Ranting cast. Frank Arcuri, Anthony Sciandra of Expected Buffalo with me. So let's go right into it. You just put out an article on Expected Buffalo, talking about some defensemen that maybe the Sabres could acquire to help with all the injuries that they've had. So obviously with Samuelsson being out probably at least for the rest of the month, Jokiharju is starting to come back. Obviously we just talked about him, what we think of him. And then we saw Dahlin miss the Tampa game, and then, who knows what could happen if another player gets hurt and they have to call up another guy from Rochester. You put out the article. I do feel the same way, and that maybe getting another guy in here who could at least keep bodies in Rochester to help them out too would be a very good idea. So I want to go over the article. So you named some players. Chad, former Sable Chad Ruedel was one guy. Justin Braun. Let's see here. Ben Hutton, Andre Sucher, Josh Brown, another former Sabre, Will Butcher, as some potential like low cost guys that they could come
there's a reason those last three guys you mentioned. I titled that section "Break Glass in Case of Emergency."
Yeah.
But if you want, I'll start at the top with Ruedel and kind of work my way down here. So I don't think this is going to sound bold to some people, because Ruedel is a guy who, he didn't quote unquote work out in Buffalo, right? They signed him as a collegiate free agent, and he hung out here for a couple years and was just largely okay, right? I think at this point in his career, now I'm not going to say he is the best, but he's in the conversation as I feel the most effective seventh defenseman in the NHL. So the biggest he's so let's talk about him as a player a little bit, right? Like his even strength defensive impacts are outstanding. Like he is a phenomenal defensive defenseman, right? He's not going to give you much in the form of offense, but he has outstanding defensive numbers, and he is a very effective penalty killer, something the Sabres could use. So in terms of clearing the puck, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a better guy to pair with. I think he'd be great for a Jacob Bryson, right? Bryson can do a little bit more freewheeling, act as a fourth forward, right? Like he likes to do, because he tends to pinch in deep as a defenseman. Maybe I think only Dahlin does it more often. So I think he'd be a good fit for him. The only issue is Pittsburgh has had him around for a good long while now. He's been their de facto seventh defenseman for, again, multiple years. They just re-signed him to a 2-year deal. But what's interesting about that is after they did that, they signed Jan Ruda, and that effectively pushed Ruedel out of the top 6, because it looked like for the first time he was actually going to get a chance to be a starting defenseman, right, for the Penguins in their defensive top 6. So now he has only played 3 games this year, and he is very firmly their seventh defenseman. And Ruda, to the Penguins' credit, has been outstanding for them as well. And they play similar roles, very defensive guy and veteran. And so I think there's a redundancy there, which maybe you can entice Pittsburgh to make a move there. And the other reason for that is Pittsburgh has maybe the worst farm system in the NHL right now. And their core, while they're definitely not, rebuilding it at this point, obviously, their core is aging. And I don't know how much longer their playoff window is going to be open here. Maybe only a year or two. So they have really nothing in the form of futures right now. So my hypothetical trade would involve futures there, and see if you can entice them. Because I'll tell you what, if you look at Pittsburgh's AHL group defensemen, they have some impressive veterans down there as well. Guys with NHL experience, and honestly, guys with NHL experience as members of the Penguins, which they know the defensive system and things of that nature. I mean, you've got Mark Friedman, who's been in that organization for a minute, right? You got Taylor Fadoon, who, as we know, can be a very effective, right. He could be a very effective extra defenseman. Ty Smith, who's younger and kind of is a little bit of a bust right now, but again, he played a lot of NHL minutes for the Devils last year. So you've got, Xavier Ouellet, who again, like deep depth defenseman, but again, like guy who's played NHL minutes. So I don't think they would bleed too badly by trading Ruedel, but they do seem to like him. So I'm not exactly sure how that trade would look, but definitely an option to consider if Buffalo wants to make a little bit of a move there. One of the other options I had, Justin Braun, historically just a stay-at-home kind of a bruiser defenseman. I think he would have been really popular in the early 2000s. But his skill set's kind of dying out, but can still be effective, especially on a team like Buffalo, who has a lot of transition defensemen who could use a stay-at-home entity like that, right? Last season, actually throughout his career, beg your pardon, he has a 10% XGA propensity to prevent, meaning they're 10% below average expected goals against are allowed when he's on the ice, meaning he's doing a good job of thwarting danger. So, again, he'll give you nothing in the form of offensive contribution, but he could be a good complementary guy there. And then Ben Hutton is interesting, where he has handled like really sporadic spot duty for the past 3 years, wherever he's been, right? He's never been able to like hold down a regular role. Like he'll play 30 games one season, then 50 the next, and then 15, right? He's kind of all over the place in that regard. But in that sporadic kind of deployment setup, let's call it, with multiple teams, he has been effective, especially defensively. And I kind of honed in on more stay-at-home guys, because I don't think you need another transition maven on the back end. You have plenty of those, and your best ones are still healthy. So I wanted to look for something a little more complimentary there. I think he's a good one, especially because with Vegas getting a little bit healthier here, they're going to have to waive somebody, and he could very well be the guy. So prior to them waiving him, if you can throw them a 6th or 7th round pick, and just say, hey, here you go, that's for you. Now you don't have to waive them and risk losing them for nothing.
Mhm.
Uh, and then maybe you send somebody like a Casey Fitzgerald back their way, a guy who would probably clear waivers, right? If they wanted someone for their AHL group, you could do that. So I think that's a dark horse possibility there. And then the emergency options, these are just guys who you could get for basically future considerations if, because again, a lot of the teams here, right? Like I just mentioned, Vegas and Pittsburgh, they're in contention. Like they're a playoff team. So making a deal for futures at this point in the season may not make a ton of sense, right? It just might not be the right time for it. So if Adams is kind of getting boxed out of the trade market just due to the timing, um, Andre Schuster is a guy in Anaheim right now who was kind of penciled in to be their seventh defenseman, seventh, eighth, whatever, but he got waived very early in the year in favor of John Merrill, who I'm a huge fan of. And initially, I was actually going to put him in this article, but I talked to a couple of Minnesota Wild writers who I respect, and I'll pick the brains of people who cover other teams before I write something. Sometimes just to say like, hey, to me, it looks like they wouldn't mind trading this guy, but what's your thought? And I got an emphatic, like, they love John Merrill as their extra. So, I said, okay, is there, who do you think? Because they've got kind of a logjam, and both of them were like, you could get Andre Schuster for a song right now. So, he, again, a guy with like really, really bad impacts overall, but defensively and on the penalty kill, he's a guy who has posted good results in let's say inconsistently. So again, break glass in case of emergency. Josh Brown rather, is just an Andre Schuster clone. Like their
Yeah.
career metrics are exactly the same. They're both gigantic, hulking right-handers. Everything I just said about Schuster, I could say about John Brown. The only difference is Brown plays a regular night-to-night role with the Coyotes. And again, how much do I want to glean from his metrics? The last 2 years, he's played in Arizona and Ottawa, like two notoriously bad XGA teams. So I don't know. And then the emergency option 3, I just listed Will Butcher because, and if he was healthy, I'd have put Pezic here. But he's out for another couple months. So I put Will Butcher just as a guy who, man, if you're just looking for a Band-Aid, he knows what Don Granato is going to expect. It would be a seamless transition in terms of knowing the system, right? Because he just did it last year. Yeah. And for overall, as bad as his underlings were, he was a little bit above replacement level on defense. So again, it's just, this is you can't, nobody wants your future assets for something bigger. Like, see if you can scrape something up here. And it's really these emergency options I listed are only if you experience more injuries. I don't think I'd do any of these moves right now. And then if you like bold approach, Arizona's been looking to trade Jacob Chikrin for what feels like 2 years now. And at some point this is going to come to a head, similar to like the Eichel situation, just lower scale. And he's a guy who we know we heard, reports the Sabres were kind of sniffing around when he was initially kind of put on the trade block, and whether or not that interest remains, I don't know, but we know the interest existed at some point. And then again, bad timing in the season, but LA does have a embarrassment of riches, both NHL caliber and within their system on defense. So maybe you can strike something there. But again, I'm not confident in either of those last two happening in November of a new season. It's just historically, if we know the NHL, stuff like that doesn't really occur. So I would, however, have been remiss not to mention them, just given how much they're speculated, I guess, upon by fans. And then today it's really frustrating because I released that article yesterday, and today you've got Mike Riley getting waived. And I would have absolutely done a section on him, because I don't know that a better defenseman has been waived in the last, I don't know, 5 years. I mean, he's the most talented defenseman I've ever seen on the waiver wire. I can't think of one better. So it would be a huge pickup. The Sabres have the 16th priority right now in waivers. However, there are only 4 teams ahead of them in that priority who could fit Riley's $3 million cap hit under their cap, right? And that's Arizona, Ottawa, Anaheim, and Chicago. So if the Sabres put in a claim, they really only have to beat out those 4 teams. Really hope they don't. So I think that's a no-brainer. That's a legitimate 29-year-old second pairing defenseman. Like, oh my God, the best team in the league right now just gifted you a second pairing caliber player. Like, you'd be nuts not to take advantage of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really weird that Boston would waive him too, because they waived him before the season started as
Mhm.
well, and nobody picked him up. And I'm just thinking, like, why? Like, why wouldn't a team like Arizona
It's
do
the
it, or
dollars, man.
Chicago? Like, that's a free asset that you can trade
Yeah.
later on.
Right, and I
No,
think there's only 7 teams total in the league who could fit him in their cap space, right, without making a move. So,
yeah,
that's a tough sell, especially early in the season when GMs are like have their rosters kind of figured out, right? They know how they want to go into the year, and then but
and then
again,
this falls in. Yeah,
but yeah, like you said though, in Arizona and Chicago, they'd be perfect examples. I mean,
like you can bite the
Philadelphia,
money.
yeah, you've got the cap space. You eat the money and shit. Even if you get a fourth for him, win. And again, though, I think having 2 years to term on his deal does kind of hurt in that regard. I don't know if these teams want to be on the hook for half his salary retained for 2 years. That might be part of it, but if there's any team that can handle that financial burden, it's Buffalo. I mean, just an
Hmm.
embarrassment of cap space, and in 2 years he'll be gone, and that's when Dahlin's deal expires, Powers' deal expires, right? And you're going to be
Hmm.
spending some money on that back end. So, as a 2 year kind of third pairing left-hander, oh my God, what an amazing gift that would be!
Yeah, I guess maybe the one thing is maybe teams don't want to spend the actual salary dollars on it because
Exactly.
his total salary this year is 3 million, but his next year is 4 million. So it's
Mm,
more back. It's a little bit more backloaded in that. I
right.
guess maybe that is why. But even then, I'm just thinking like it's only $1 million more than what his cap hit is. Is
Mhm.
it really that big of a deal?
Who knows, right? And you're
I guess
talking
it
about
depends on the team.
not in right, exactly, not in Chicago's case, but in terms of Ottawa and Arizona, right? Those are cap budget teams. Those are like strict budget teams.
Yeah.
So that expenditure could definitely play a role for them. But like you said, we've got Chicago and Anaheim in there who they're not that way. Anaheim kind of has an internal cap budget, but not really. They're a large enough market where they can kind of support it. And then Chicago has no internal budget to speak of. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, surprising. But again,
Yeah.
as we know,
Chicago would be the team that
I
I
think
wouldn't
so,
be
right?
shocked.
And I wouldn't be
I
shocked
really
at
wouldn't.
Ottawa actually at this point, just because Riley played there
Yeah.
at one point. So maybe a reunion there. They feel like, hey, we like this guy. We had to let him go, but bring him back, add some depth. I think Ottawa though and Chicago are your 2 biggest quote unquote threats. Or if Arizona's been sitting on a Chikrin offer, right, and they say like, oh, holy shit, like we can replace him right now for free. He's not as good
Mhm.
as Chikrin. I don't want people to think
No.
that's what I'm saying, but like, oh my God, you're not going to find a better in-season replacement than right there if that's
Yeah.
what you're worried about. So
Mhm.
who knows on that front, right?
Yeah, and especially if maybe Arizona isn't getting the kind of offer because what they want for Chicken's pretty much similar to what Buffalo got for Eichel
Yeah,
in a way.
they want a
So
3 first-round pick valuation, which is
yeah,
insane.
and I mean, they're not going to get that, especially with Chikrin not on the lineup right now. Um,
And with only like 2 teams that could currently afford him, you'd have to trade
yeah,
salary back to Arizona, which they're a team that could absorb it, of course. But like, yeah, it's not that straightforward.
yeah, and I don't know how many like dead contracts there are in the league that they could take on to help make that
Right,
work.
right.
That as well. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think Mike Riley would be a great addition for any of these teams. Really, just
He's a
even
rich man's Jacob Bryson, in my opinion. Like if I had to
yeah,
compare him to somebody, like he's a Jacob Bryson who's a little more well rounded.
yeah, yeah, man, it just reminds me how much I really
Hmm.
loved Bryson coming out when he was
Hmm.
playing in college. I really liked him. Um, so it's I guess my biggest thing is now where does the team go from here? Because they've lost 3 straight games. Their numbers still look good. Like overall as a team, I mean
Yeah,
they're
they're right in the middle of the pack, right?
yeah right in the middle
Hmm.
of the pack. They're just a hair above 50% XGF percentage.
Hmm.
Um, uh, which is 15th overall.
And they've saved 1 goal above expected, which again,
Yeah,
super middle of the pack, right?
yeah, yeah, and I mean And then you know, yes, but yeah, really. Expected goals for per 60, they are at where are they? Where are they? 18th
Mm-hmm.
at 2.68, 2.62 expected goals against per 60, which is 14th in the league. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they're pretty much just an average team right
They
now.
are an average team,
And
and
I mean,
and a 7-6 record is reflective of that.
yeah, it is. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess, and I guess, and I'm also just been feeling like, isn't that kind of where we wanted them to be?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Again, though, I think that hot start got everybody excited. Now it feels like I think if you got to 7-6 and you started like 2-5, right, but then you just won 5 your last six, it would be a different vibe right now. Like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, they're picking up pace. Like they took a minute to get ready, right? But winning so much that early and then kind of falling apart a little bit again, it feels very familiar to a lot of people,
Oh
and
yeah.
understandably so, right? So I think that's where a lot of the current negativity is. I tweeted this yesterday right after the game. I feel no different about my confidence in the Sabres trajectory as a young team on the rise than I did at the beginning of the year. Um,
Yeah.
this is almost exactly how I expected them to start. Just I think they're going to be right around an 82 to 84 point team. That was what I predicted at the beginning of the year, and they're a little better pace than that right now. But I'm not surprised. I think you're going to see a team with highs and lows, right? And that's common for a young team, especially common for a young team that doesn't have elite goaltending.
Mhm.
It's very average goaltending, and it's only average because in his 4 starts, Craig Anderson has completely stood on his head. He's been phenomenal. I think he's still rocking like what, a 95% save percentage. Like he's off to a wonderful start. Um, but you know, is what
Yeah.
it is. But again,
So
I don't think anyone expected Comrie to come in here and be a Vezina candidate.
no, I don't think so either. I don't think he should have to be, and
Right.
you know, just to make a name for himself. So yeah, let's go into the goaltending then. So all situations, Anderson is at 928. Comrie
928.
is at,
Okay.
yeah, Comrie's at 890.
Mm-hmm.
Anderson's goal saved above expected is at 3.21, while
Yep.
Comrie's is at negative 3.78.
Oh, so
And
they're below in GSX now. Before the game
I'm on
against
it. Yeah, and I'm using Evolving Hockey for this, so
same.
I know.
That's what I
Yeah,
use. Yeah. So before
yeah.
the Arizona game, they were 1 goal above expected because Chad and I actually mentioned it on our podcast.
Mhm.
So bad bad GSAX game for Comrie against Arizona.
Yeah, and
Because he was at negative 2.2 before that game. So him being at negative
yeah,
3 point, what'd you say, 3.7?
yeah,
That's big. That's a big drop for one game. So
yeah, it is.
yeah,
And
not his
weird,
best.
I guess weird too, because like one of those goals went off. Well, two of the goals went off of Cousins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you had the other goal, the third goal, the first goal of the game be a complete mental
Mm-hmm.
lapse by Power right at the
Right.
beginning. And so I'm just thinking like, what's Comrie supposed to do on any of those? I guess
So
maybe you'd want to save on the deflected one because that's probably the
yeah,
most savable shots.
right.
But I don't know. Like I
Yeah, he
feel
had some bad
I
luck.
guess yeah, I guess I just feel like Comrie's just gotten a case of a lot of rotten luck so far
Mm-hmm.
this year.
Yeah, I think he and Chad actually asked me the question on our last show. He said, if you were to describe Eric Comrie to this point, what would you say? And I said average starter because that's what he's been. I mean, he's been his raw save percentage isn't great, but I mean he's been a middle of the pack, ranking between like 17th to 22nd, right, starter in the NHL. So like
Mhm.
he's average. He's fine. He's what I was anticipating. Anderson is in the backup role has way exceeded my expectations. I think he's played really well. But Comrie is just he's a guy you survive with for a couple of years as your starter, and then Devin Levi comes in and we're rocking and
Hopefully,
rolling.
yeah,
So
blows the door open.
mhm.
Yeah, and I guess, but too, like with the expectations for the goaltending, and obviously you mentioned it. Anderson has blown it all, the expectation, his own expectations out of the
Mhm.
water, and you hope it keeps up as long as he's getting spot starts. I think it's very reasonable that he
Mhm.
can continue it if he's starting like one out of every 3 or 4 games. You
Yeah,
know, kind of makes me wonder if he's going to start against Vegas tomorrow.
I think he will.
I think so too.
Yeah, because that was
I
his
kind of
300th win last year. Like it's
Yep,
symbolic. Like
yep.
Don Granato, I believe, is a little bit sentimental in that regard. I
Hmm.
think that's why Hinestroza is back in the lineup for this game
Yeah,
because because if I recall, Hino had a pretty strong game that night. So
Oh
I
yeah,
think,
he was
yeah,
very good that
yeah,
game.
I
Yeah.
think he's kind of running it back with as many of the guys from last year as possible. So
Mhm.
I would be surprised if it wasn't Anderson.
Yeah, I would be too. And then you know at 5-on-5, so at the 5v5 numbers, Anderson's at 937,
Mm,
2.16 goal saved above expected. Comrie's at 905
hmm.
and negative 1.63 GSAX. If
Yeah, so the
I
penalty kill's been hurting him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and which kind of sounds about right because the Sabres penalty kill has kind of not been that good.
Yeah, and that's Linus Allmark in a nutshell, man. His whole career here is that he was, I feel, very underrated, and every year his even strength, numbers were so good, like
Mhm.
top 10 in the league good, but the penalty kill he was like dead last twice, like 2 years in a row. Like he would get absolutely crushed on the PK.
Yeah,
And now he's playing in Boston and he looks very good.
yeah. I very good to an extent. I will say because he's getting his 5v5 numbers have been okay.
Mm.
I'm actually looking at the entire league right now, and he's 15th, at least based on every goalie that's played. He's 15th at 932 5v5 save percentage. Goal saved above expected is at 0.85.
So you're saying he's got a 932 at 5v5, huh?
Yeah,
That's crazy. His overall is 932, so he's
that
saving
is weird.
the same amount. So he's crushing it on the penalty kill. Then,
Yeah,
if you're saving at 93 on the PK, you are absolutely
yeah.
crushing
His
it.
overall right now he's at 931, but it's like 931.6.
Okay.
And then his GSAX is 5.33.
Yeah, that's
So
money.
that drop off right there. I
Yeah.
mean, and it does help that he's on a better Boston team. That's also been
Oh
just
my God.
extremely hot to start the year.
Toying with the league. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hmm.
And now they just got Marchand back, and now they're getting. I think I read that they're getting McAvoy back soon too.
Yeah. They are.
So,
That's why Riley got waived.
yeah, that
Yeah.
would make
Yep.
sense. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they're a wagon, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. I'm going to the game Saturday, so I can't wait. Can't wait for that. It's gonna be fun.
I'll say a prayer for you, pal.
It's all good. It's all good. I love it. So I guess now if we continue with Comrie,
Mhm.
how many? I guess let's go over this. How many actual like bad goals or like tough goals have you seen him allow this year, as compared maybe to what like Linus Olmark had when he was here? If we're at least looking at the two, because since you brought Olmark up earlier.
So I always felt a little better about Allmark than I think the general consensus, right? I was a little bit more of a fan of his
Mhm.
than most, I would say. So I think Allmark's the better goalie. I think his time here was better. The team was just kind of bad. I think on this team you'd see a jump in his raw numbers for sure. But I don't think the gap is very large. There have been goals, Comrie's let in that I'm like, yeah, I need a save there, but it's once every couple of games, I think, where I'm really like, dude, what the hell? Like, you're an NHL goalie, right? So again, I'm not disappointed with Comrie. I think he's average, and that's fine. Like, that's kind of what I anticipated, right? It wasn't a good goalie market this year. Everyone was like, John Gibson. It's like, yeah, well, where's John Gibson now?
Not that good.
Well, no, it's not even just that. I mean, yeah, he's had bad numbers for years, but guess what? He's still on the Ducks.
He is yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, so all those big names you talked about, how many of them ended up moving? Very few, right? So I don't know. It was never really plausible for me to make a big splash there, and I think they got the best available goalie, and it just so happens that guy's probably about a league average starter, which again, what a massive leap that from last year, where you were the second worst GSAX team in the league behind Seattle, who both their goalies forgot how to hockey for a year, which was insane. But in any other year, the Sabres would have been the worst GSAX team in the league, and
Yeah.
just being average, like, what a revelation.
That's what I've been saying too from the start, is like Comrie doesn't have to come in and be a world beater. He just has to come in and be stable
And
just
not be Aaron Dell,
and not be
yeah,
Aaron Dell.
right.
Exactly. Exactly. And it just, if you can come in and be consistently average the whole season, you're
Mhm.
gonna see a jump in the points for the Sabres overall. I mean, we have to remember, like, the Sabres, with that hot stretch that they had to end the year, the Sabres ended up at, I think it was like 77 points. So a bit just under an NHL 500 season. And that was with largely bad goaltending the whole year. And that was with having, to start Malcolm Subban and Aaron Dell all for games, and with Anderson being out multiple months. Now with Comrie coming in, and all he has to do is just be average, you're gonna see, I think you will see a jump in points just based off of that, and also just based off of the team in front of him being better as well, based on their expected goals numbers, and even defensively. I mean, they're gonna give up as much as they're gonna get as well. That's just based on their numbers right now. That's kind of what they've been doing. So I don't really see why people should be clamoring they're falling apart. The world, it's over, whatever. No, it's not working. Just because they've lost 3 in a row. They played 3 really good games in a row, and they just happen to lose. But they could play 3 really good games in a row and win, because that's what an average team does. And having the youngest team in the league be that kind of an average team, honestly, when you look at it in the long run, I think it bodes pretty well for your future and what the potential of this roster can be. Because all you need is a little bit of improvement here and there, and all of a sudden you're going to see massive improvement overall.
Right.
That's just what happens when you have a young team like that.
Yeah, with this core on its current trajectory, right? If Devon Levi is half the goalie he seems to be in college, like, you've got excellent goaltending, right? And so you add excellent, you add excellent goaltending to this group. That's a playoff team for sure, right? I mean, goalies
more than a playoff team at that point.
Right. So, especially with a couple more years of development under their belts, right? You'll have guys like Cousins. Thompson's already in his prime, but still in the thick of his prime. You'll have Cousins, Peterka, Quinn, all those guys hitting their prime.
Krebs,
Dahlin, Krebs, right? Power, right? Even if a couple of the guys don't end up panning out the way you hope, that's still like such a great core. And then you add an elite young goalie to that. Oh my God. So hopefully, and again, goalies don't always make seamless transitions from NCAA to the pros. We know that. But if he's even close to as good as he's looked for Northeastern, like, holy shit, like that's so huge.
It would be huge. And even too, I don't want to leave the guy out there, because he's been playing games for the Sabres, and he's in Rochester right now. I think he can be a wild card, but I think we're getting to the point where maybe he's just not it. At least we have to see this year, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen.
Yeah, he's had a rough start to the season already. I think he's under 900 save percentage, at least last time I checked. He's had very sporadic performances. He had one game where he was like less than 80%. So he's kind of the same guy he's been. And then, you got Michael Hauser behind him posting a 9.23. So it's not likely the team in front of him. So yeah, I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny too. Like, I don't know how sometimes goalies can just be, they're average to bad in the AHL, and then they come to the NHL and they're just better. I mean, I guess maybe that's just based off of how systems are in both leagues, because NHL is more tighter, while the AHL seems to be maybe more open that way. But and maybe that's also because of the skill level discrepancy too. And maybe that helps with goaltending being such a wild card every year. And it's just like, man, he's 23, and I don't want to write him off just yet, because I just feel like that's still really young for a goalie.
Yeah,
you usually don't see goalies hit their stride until they're around Comrie's age.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, they definitely have a longer developmental lead time. That's for sure. But I will say this: I think in order to feel confident about a goalie, I think you do need to see some incremental improvement year over year, even if they are developing slow. And I don't think we're seeing that. And that's my biggest apprehension with ever considering Luukkonen something relevant for the future of this team.
Yeah, definitely. And then you put on top of that, I mean, you still have Portillo, who could still sign, but we'll see. And then they just drafted another goalie in the past draft. Luminen, I believe.
Topias Leonin.
Yeah, Leonin, that's it, yeah. who I'm looking at his Finnish numbers right now. He's in 8 games in Liga. He's at 841, but he's also 18 years old. So
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to really judge him on that.
Well, it's funny because he had just abysmal numbers, and even last year. So he was. A lot of people felt he was like the biggest reach of the draft. So hopefully the Sabres know something that nobody else seems to know about this guy. But yeah, his career numbers just throughout his kind of development have been really awful. So
Well,
I hope they know something. And I've said this so many times. It's like a running joke on Twitter. If I write something about a goalie, the opposite will happen. So I'm not.
yeah,
Goalies are voodoo. They're wild
such
cards
a
all the
voodoo. I
time.
know.
They're stupid. I
No.
almost never write about them for that reason. Um, just because like that goalies hate you and they'll make you look stupid.
Yep,
That's their favorite thing.
it's
So
very true. I guess
yeah.
maybe the saving grace for Lennon and his looks like he gets his Finnish junior numbers. It looks like under 20, 943 in
Yeah.
7 games this year. So, and obviously he's gonna I think he's gonna have a shot at playing in the World Juniors for Finland, in the
Mhm.
next year or two. So maybe hopefully then we'll see some real development out of him,
Mhm.
maybe real progress. So at least you got that to look forward to. There's plenty of time with him.
Mhm.
Well, I think that's gonna do it. Almost an hour in. Anthony, thank you for coming on and doing this. I'm glad we were able to chat. After a couple weeks of having to push things back.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thank you for having me on. And yeah, I'm glad we were able to lock down a day here and
Yeah,
get back on the show.
yeah, definitely. Tell the people to plug out your social media and your work.
Yeah, you can find all my stuff at Expected Buffalo. That's from written content to our podcast. It's all on our site, expectedbuffalo.com. And then on Twitter, my handle is at xbanth, ANTH. So if you want to follow my nonsense on there, you're more than welcome. But yeah, again, thanks for having me on, Frank. And, looking forward to some more Sabres hockey coming up here.
Yep, definitely. And for Frank Curry and Anthony Sciandra, we will see you next week on the Ranting Cast.